turn it off now. He has set forth the Obama doctrine. And I'm not sure what the Obama doctrine is. You can kill it, Mr. Producer. It's still in my head here. And Andy McCarthy asks a great question over at National View Online, I believe. He said, in essence, when did Obama come to the realization that Qaddafi was bad for the world and bad for Libya? He said, I hope President Obama will explain why he thought it was perfectly fine not only to maintain the Bush U.S. policy that Qaddafi was a valuable U.S. ally against terrorism, but actually to have his State Department under our new Qaddafi scourge, Hillary Clinton, contribute $400,000 to foundations run by Qaddafi's children. And he says, unless there be any doubt, that contribution came after Qaddafi's son Saif, recipient of half the State Department contribution, escorted Lockerbie terrorist Abdel Bassett al-Megrahi home to a hero's welcome after Qaddafi, with full American knowledge, pressured the United Kingdom and Scotland to secure his release. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this one fact seems to put a different light on everything you've just heard from the President of the United States. What's obvious is he got together with his speechwriters, his political advisors, as well as his substantive advisors, to discuss how to cobble together all the events that took place in the incoherence that you and I witnessed for more than 10 days. He doesn't say in there that it was the Brits and the French who kept pulling him along. He talks about I, me, he ordered, he said, but it didn't really start out that way. And he said the United States, can't stand by while atrocities are going on. And look, there are circumstances where he's exactly right, but he hasn't explained to us really what those circumstances are. There are atrocities going on in Iran, and he sat there for days when the people rose up. So why Libya? I don't think he gave an effective answer to that, because he didn't. But back to McCarthy's point. A month ago, less than a month ago, our State Department, this administration, not only embraced the Bush position toward Qaddafi, but was pushing it even further. That is, an alliance with Libya, an alliance with Qaddafi. Was he not a murderer before then? Did he not murder Americans before then? Why give $400,000 of our money to one of his son's foundations? And here we are, not long thereafter, condemning him. The same administration, the same president. He also took a swipe at Bill Clinton, the events that took place in the Balkans. Common sense tells you when you look at the terrain, the various and historic ethnic differences, that the entire history of that region is completely different. The number of people, far more than in Libya, a country of 6, 7, 8 million people. You're not talking about a desert. You're talking about very difficult terrain, among other things. Terrain that's been fought over time and time and time again. And you're talking about various European alliances, including Russia, that have been in existence for a very, very long time. So he takes a shot at Clinton in order to advance his own image of himself. And while I think those who want this to go on in Libya will praise it, I think the rest of us will still be scratching our heads, don't you? Well, I'll ask you. We'll be right back. You should see some of the emails I'm getting from buddies of mine, many of whom you would know. This is disgusting. All this is a lecture. And, in his speech, Obama said tonight, for more than 4 decades, the Libyan people have been ruled by a tyrant, Muammar Gaddafi. He has denied his people freedom, exploited their wealth, murdered opponents at home and abroad, terrorized innocent people around the world, including Americans, who were killed by Libyan agents. Last month, Gaddafi's grip of fear appeared to give way to the promise of freedom. In cities and towns across the country, Libyans took to the streets to claim their basic human rights. As one Libyan said, for the first time, we finally have hope that our nightmare of 40 years will soon be over. I have a question for the media out there. What part of this wasn't true 2 months ago, 5 months ago, 10 months ago, when Bush was president of the United States and we made nice with Qaddafi? What part of this wasn't true then? This gives the lie to the lecture that he's giving us. And it also gives the lie to the little pieces he cobbles together to try and convince you that this was all part of a coherent strategy from day one, when we know, in fact, it wasn't. It played out right in front of us. He looked for the fastest way out, and he feels he found it with NATO. But even now, the ambiguity about what we do next, what happens in Libya next, does, quote-unquote, Qaddafi stay or go? He has no answer. And so he talks in platitudes about the future of free Libya. And yet he, for 2 years, helped subsidize and support and imprison Libya. What happened to those universal rights when we were subsidizing Qaddafi? We didn't freeze his $30-some billion in assets any time in the last 2 years up until now. Only now. 40 years, he says. 40 years he terrorized his people. And for the last several, under 2 administrations, we reached out to him. I'll be right back. A friend of mine writes, he never mentioned Congress. He mentioned Congress in a passing sentence about how he consulted with Congress early on. But a consultation can take many forms. And for Obama, I believe early on it was of the superficial hit-and-run form. There was nothing new in this speech. In fact, it's a little confusing. It's confusing for the reasons that I just addressed. 40 years of tyranny, 40 years, and in the last several years, we treated him as a partner against terrorism. So which is it? Which really is deplorable when you consider he murdered American citizens. At the beginning of the speech, he talks about American leadership, meaning himself. Believe me, he talks about America. And when he talks about America, he means him. I did this, I did that, I ordered this, I ordered that. And then later in the speech, he says, but we've organized, NATO and so forth, so they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, of course, with our help. So that's not clear to me either, what he means by all that. What happened here is what I said early on. He's cobbled together the events and tried to put the best face on them. He brought NATO in, or tried to, and NATO came in, because he needed to get out. The American people were not going to support an American military operation going on much longer, given that we have 2 big battles going on, still in Iraq, yes, and in Afghanistan. Just how much more can you do with our armed forces when, on the other hand, you're cutting their budget and slashing their support? Plus, he couldn't really say exactly why he's doing what he's doing, and he still hasn't. He still hasn't. Like I say, you want to look at a humanitarian, absolutely unbelievable genocide and mass rape and everything. It's been going on for so long in the Sudan and Congo. And to my knowledge, he hasn't lifted a finger, if that is his position, if America has a role. And what about Iran? I mean, Iran is really building nukes. Just a few years ago, they said they didn't have enough oil, and they were building nuclear power plants to heat their homes. It's funny in a sick way. That's right, you can't prove it otherwise, Levin. I used to get that too. Well, now they brag about it. And why is he embracing at a state dinner a regime in China that is repressive, that has gulags, that tortures and executes political prisoners and uses their organs on the black market for cash? That's pretty gross, isn't it? I mean, one of these genocidal regimes trumps another, and yet Libya was the place. Now, he hasn't really provided a clear explanation to me, and the reason I cut him off, he had another 10 minutes to go, is I looked ahead at the speech, and it was nothing but a lecture. And there was nothing newsworthy in it. But I'm curious to know what you think. Hunter in South Carolina, XM Satellite, go ahead.
Hey, Mark. Long-time listener here. It really makes me sick listening to him because, he didn't do anything. Sarkozy drug him to it kicking and screaming. And, what do you think? Like, to me, it sets an eerie precedent for me because, I think if he can do that there, if the UN can drag us there, knowing that they have to have our Air Force, couldn't they do that in Israel, if these new nations, these new democratic, quote, Arab...
Oh, you ask an interesting question. We've kind of been dealing with this for a week, Hunter, which is, well, when do you go to the UN for permission now? Do we have to go every time? We've had this very aggressive debate on my social sites over when and if a president has to consult with Congress and declarations of war and so forth. I would like to know what our new system is, because there apparently is one. The president feels more obliged to inform the UN and get UN permission than he does to consult, as a policy and political matter even, with members of Congress. So when do we take military operations in advance to the United Nations and seek the approval, or at least not the dissent, of the Russians and the Chinese, and when don't we? And I think, as I've said several times now, this president wants to create a precedent where more often than not that's what we're going to be doing. And as for Israel or any other country and how that affects it, clearly these countries in the UN, it's a freak show. And they're lining up more and more, getting prepared to declare a Palestinian state, whether Israel recognizes one or not. And what are we going to do when that happens? I guess we'll have to accept it or pretend that we're not. But if we are going to voluntarily confer all kinds of authority on the United Nations Security Council, which includes some of our mortal enemies, well, I don't know how we pick and choose which battles we're going to take to them, which diplomatic issues we're going to accept from them, and it absolutely does weaken our sovereignty. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Hunter, God bless you, my friend. Great state of South Carolina. Let us move to New York, with Ruth on WABC. How are you?
Great, Mark. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm so thankful you're here for such a time as this. And I tell you that from the bottom of my heart, because I don't think he has a policy. I think what he's doing is rolling the dice and playing a big old game of risk. And the big prize is the sovereignty of the United States. And, I've had a lot of family in military. I lost my brother in the Vietnam War. And so I feel like I've got, and maybe that's a lot of where my passion comes from my nation. It cost us a lot to have somebody send my brother off to war. It turned my life upside down. And all these people out there with their boys and gals overseas, my heart just goes out to them. But I was telling Mike, your call screener, that I work with a gal who's going after her master's. And she turned to me the other day and she said, when did Hiroshima happen? I said, are you asking me because you think that I was alive then? Or are you asking me because you really don't know? Going for her master's, right? She really didn't know. And that scares me too, because it's not just about the military protecting us. We have got to build from within on the truths that make this nation great. And we have got to pay attention to what these guys in New York, L.A., Washington, around the world are trying to do to us. Or Mark, I don't know where we'll be next year.
All right, Ruth. God bless you, my friend, and you take care. Ruth is a wonderful lady.